At 3:15 a.m. on June 22, 1941, along a front stretching more than 1,800 miles from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, German artillery opened fire. The shelling was not concentrated. It was distributed. Bridges, rail yards, forward airfields, border posts. The opening minutes were not intended to shock. They were intended to paralyze. Orders had been issued weeks earlier that this war would be decided before winter. Fuel allocations, ammunition stocks, and rail timetables were all calculated on that assumption. The German invasion of the Soviet Union began not as a gamble, but as a solution. In Berlin, the war against Britain had stalled into an expensive stalemate. German industry was operating near capacity. Imports of oil, rubber, and grain were already under strain. The Reich was mobilized for war, but not for a long one. Every additional month tightened constraints that no operational brilliance could fully offset. The Eastern Campaign was supposed to remove those constraints. The plan, known as Operation Barbarossa, assumed that the Soviet Union would collapse in a matter of weeks. Not because of ideological conviction but because of arithmetic. Soviet railways used a different gauge. Soviet roads were largely unpaved. Soviet command structures had been disrupted by purges. German intelligence estimated that the Red Army possessed roughly half the divisions it actually had. None of these assumptions appeared reckless in isolation. Taken together, they formed a logic that pointed in only one direction. Delay would not make the invasion easier. Delay would make it impossible. By the summer of 1941, Germany's strategic position had already begun to narrow. The Battle of Britain had failed to force British capitulation. The Luftwaffe had suffered losses it could not easily replace. German shipyards could not build submarines fast enough to sever Atlantic supply lines before American industrial capacity came fully into play. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, was rearming at an accelerating pace. In 1939, Soviet tank production had been limited by design chaos and factory reorganization. By 1941, output was stabilizing. New models were entering service. Aircraft production was rising sharply. Soviet industry was not efficient, but it was expanding. From the German perspective, this created a closing window. If the Soviet Union was to be defeated, it had to be done before its industrial base matured, before its officer corps recovered, and before American material power could influence the Eastern theater indirectly. Every month of peace favored Moscow. Every month of war against Britain drained Berlin. The invasion therefore appeared not only rational but urgent. On paper, the Wehrmacht was at the height of its power. It fielded approximately 3.3 million men for the operation. Over 3,500 tanks. Nearly 3,000 aircraft. The command structure had proven itself in Poland and France. Logistics units had been expanded. Rail repair battalions were attached to each army group. But the numbers concealed fragility. Germany did not possess the fuel reserves to sustain prolonged mechanized operations at full tempo. Its motorization rate was uneven. Most infantry divisions still relied on horses. Ammunition stocks were calculated for weeks, not months. Replacement pipelines assumed short campaigns with limited attrition. These were not oversights. They were consequences. German economic planning had never fully transitioned to a total war footing. Consumer production continued. Civilian morale was considered politically sensitive. Industrial conversion was incomplete. The assumption underlying all of it was speed. Speed was not simply a preference. It was a requirement imposed by material limits. The invasion plan reflected this constraint. Army Group North would drive through the Baltic states toward Leningrad. Army Group Center, the strongest formation, would advance toward Moscow. Army Group South would secure Ukraine with its grain and industrial resources. The Red Army would be encircled near the border and destroyed before it could retreat. The distances involved were vast, but they were discounted. German planners calculated that Soviet resistance would collapse once its forward armies were destroyed. Rail lines could then be repaired at leisure. Supply depots could move forward. The campaign would end before logistical strain became decisive. What this calculation did not account for was time lost before collapse. In the first days, the operation appeared to confirm every assumption. Soviet airfields were caught unprepared. Thousands of aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Border units were overrun. Entire formations were encircled. Prisoners moved west in columns that seemed endless. Yet even as the German advance accelerated, constraints began to accumulate quietly. Soviet forces did not disintegrate uniformly. Some units dissolved. Others fought until encircled. Still others withdrew eastward in disorder but not annihilation. The Red Army absorbed losses on a scale that would have shattered most militaries, but it continued to generate new formations. German timetables slipped not by weeks but by days. Bridges destroyed in retreat had to be repaired. Railheads lagged behind advancing spearheads. Fuel trucks traveled increasing distances over poor roads. Vehicles broke down at rates higher than anticipated. These were manageable problems individually. Together they consumed margin. By July, Army Group Center had achieved massive encirclements near Minsk and Smolensk. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were captured. The road to Moscow appeared open. But the advance had outrun its supply system. Panzer divisions were operating at the edge of fuel range. Infantry divisions were weeks behind. Rail conversion lagged far behind planning assumptions. The tempo that made German operations effective was becoming difficult to sustain. At the same time, German leaders confronted a decision shaped by scarcity rather than strategy. Ukraine remained unconquered. Soviet forces there were retreating but intact. The region contained grain, coal, and industrial capacity that Germany desperately needed. Leaving it in Soviet hands meant prolonging economic vulnerability. The choice was framed as temporary. Panzer forces were diverted south to assist Army Group South. Moscow could wait. The Soviet capital was not considered an operational necessity. The destruction of Soviet forces was. This decision did not reverse German fortunes immediately. In the short term, it produced another massive encirclement near Kiev. More prisoners. More territory. More apparent confirmation that the campaign was unfolding as planned. But it consumed time that could not be recovered. August turned to September. Weather remained favorable but distances grew. Soviet resistance hardened. New formations appeared. Defensive lines were established deeper inland. German units grew fatigued. Equipment wore down. The assumption that the Soviet Union would collapse before winter was still officially maintained, but it now required increasingly optimistic interpretations of events. Fuel consumption exceeded projections. Replacement vehicles were slow to arrive. Horses died in large numbers from exhaustion and disease. Ammunition stocks were redistributed between army groups, creating local shortages. None of this suggested imminent defeat. It suggested friction. In October, the drive toward Moscow resumed under the codename Operation Typhoon. Initial successes were again impressive. Soviet defenses were breached. Encirclements were achieved. Panic spread in the capital. Government ministries prepared evacuation plans. But the calendar had shifted. Autumn rains turned roads into mud. Vehicles bogged down. Horse-drawn wagons sank axle-deep. Supply movements slowed to a crawl. Rail conversion could not compensate. The front advanced faster than logistics could follow, then slowed as supplies failed to arrive. Cold weather arrived earlier than anticipated. German troops lacked winter clothing. Lubricants froze. Weapons malfunctioned. Engines failed to start. The Red Army did not collapse. Instead, it absorbed, adapted, and reinforced. Divisions raised in Siberia, released by intelligence indicating Japanese neutrality, were transferred west. Defensive depth increased. Counterattacks grew more coordinated. By December, German forces stood within sight of Moscow's outskirts. They could see the city's spires through binoculars. But they could not advance. They could not retreat either. The invasion had passed its point of no return long before this moment. It had done so when speed failed to compensate for distance, when economic limits constrained operational choice, when time became an enemy rather than an ally. The decision to invade had been made under the pressure of narrowing options. It appeared logical. It addressed immediate constraints. It promised decisive resolution. What it could not do was account for cumulative delay. Germany entered the winter of 1941 committed to a war it could no longer shorten and could not easily sustain. The Soviet Union, battered but intact, had gained what it needed most: time. In early December 1941, temperatures west of Moscow fell to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. The German army had not planned for this condition. Winter clothing production had been postponed earlier in the year to conserve industrial capacity for weapons and vehicles. The assumption that the campaign would end before sustained cold set in had shaped procurement schedules months earlier. Those decisions could not be reversed in December. Troops improvised. They wrapped feet in rags. They stripped clothing from the dead. Engines were kept running through the night to prevent freezing, consuming fuel that could not be replaced. Artillery pieces cracked. Machine guns seized. The Red Army did not face these constraints in the same way. Soviet industry had planned for winter operations as a matter of geography. Clothing stocks existed, though unevenly distributed. Cold weather lubricants were standard. Rail lines feeding Moscow were intact and close to the front. More importantly, Soviet command no longer expected immediate collapse. On December 5, the Red Army launched a counteroffensive along a broad front. The attacks were not tactically brilliant. They were uneven and costly. But they exploited a condition that German planning had excluded: operational exhaustion without strategic decision. German units were pushed back from Moscow's outskirts. Not far but decisively. Positions that had been taken at great cost in October were abandoned in days. The retreat was unplanned, uncoordinated, and psychologically damaging. For the first time in the war, the Wehrmacht was forced into sustained defensive operations against a major power. This change did not announce itself as permanent. German leadership interpreted it as a temporary setback. The front stabilized. The line held. Soviet losses were heavy. The Red Army did not break through. But the nature of the war had already changed. The German army was now committed to holding a front that stretched thousands of miles, through terrain that imposed seasonal paralysis twice a year. Supply requirements multiplied. Replacement demands grew. Attrition became continuous rather than episodic. These were not conditions Germany's economy had been structured to support. In January 1942, production figures revealed the imbalance. Soviet factories, many relocated east of the Urals during the autumn, were resuming output. Tank production increased despite losses. Aircraft numbers recovered rapidly. The Soviet system absorbed disruption by dispersal and scale. German industry, by contrast, faced bottlenecks it could not bypass. Access to oil remained limited. Synthetic fuel plants were operating near capacity but could not expand quickly. Steel allocation was constrained by competing demands. Skilled labor shortages worsened as casualties mounted. The invasion had not failed in the sense of collapse. It had failed in the sense of timing. Germany had committed itself to a war of duration without the means to win one. This reality shaped every decision that followed. In the spring of 1942, German planners faced a dilemma created by the previous year's choices. The army could not resume a broad front offensive toward Moscow without rebuilding strength and logistics. It also could not remain indefinitely on the defensive without conceding initiative and morale. Economic pressures again narrowed the range of options. Oil shortages were acute. Romania's production was insufficient. Synthetic output was capped. Without additional sources, mechanized warfare could not be sustained at scale. The Caucasus oil fields therefore became an operational objective not because of ideology, but because of arithmetic. The decision to launch a southern offensive in 1942 was an attempt to escape the constraints imposed by the failure of 1941. Army Group South was reinforced at the expense of other sectors. The front elsewhere was thinned. The assumption was that a decisive blow in the south would restore strategic balance before the Soviet Union could fully mobilize its resources. Once again, speed was the solution. The summer offensive initially achieved success. German forces advanced deep into southern Russia. Soviet units retreated. Territory was gained rapidly. The illusion of regained momentum returned. But the distances were even greater than the year before. As German columns pushed toward the Volga and the Caucasus, supply lines stretched hundreds of miles across territory with limited infrastructure. Rail conversion lagged again. Fuel shortages constrained movement. Divisions were split between objectives that competed for resources. The decision to divide forces between Stalingrad and the Caucasus was not a dramatic blunder at the moment it was made. It was a compromise forced by limited capacity. Concentration was desired. Dispersion was unavoidable. Each advance reduced flexibility. By late summer, German units were fighting in urban ruins along the Volga while others stalled in the Caucasus foothills, short of fuel and transport. Neither objective could be abandoned without political and strategic cost. Neither could be decisively completed with available means. The Red Army adapted to this dispersion. Soviet command concentrated reserves beyond German reconnaissance. Production surged. Training improved. Coordination increased. The learning curve steepened. In November 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus against overextended Axis flanks near Stalingrad. The attacking forces did not strike German divisions directly. They targeted Allied units with inferior equipment and limited mobility. The encirclement that followed was not immediately recognized as irreversible. German leadership believed air supply could sustain the trapped forces. That belief was shaped by previous experience and by reluctance to concede failure. The calculations were wrong. The Luftwaffe lacked the aircraft, fuel, and weather conditions required to supply an entire army. Losses mounted. Deliveries fell short. Time again became the decisive factor. By February 1943, the Sixth Army surrendered. The loss was operationally catastrophic, but strategically it confirmed what had been implicit since December 1941. Germany no longer controlled the pace or direction of the war in the East. From this point onward, German strategy became reactive. Attempts to regain initiative, such as the offensive at Kursk in the summer of 1943, were constrained by shortages that could not be concealed. Tank production increased, but fuel availability limited training and deployment. Aircraft numbers rose, but pilot quality declined. New weapons entered service too slowly and in insufficient numbers. Meanwhile, the Soviet system converted time into strength. Industrial output surpassed German levels. Logistics improved. Command cohesion increased. Losses remained high, but replacement flows exceeded attrition. The Red Army no longer relied on desperate defense. It planned, coordinated, and sustained large-scale offensives. The invasion of 1941 had been intended to prevent this outcome. Instead, it ensured it. By opening a war of annihilation without the capacity to conclude it quickly, Germany had locked itself into a contest it could only lose over time. Each year compounded disadvantages established in the first months of the campaign. The original decision to invade had not been irrational. It had been conditioned by constraints that made delay appear fatal. Britain had not fallen. Resources were finite. The Soviet Union was growing stronger. What proved fatal was not the logic of invasion, but the margin for error it assumed. The German system required rapid success to justify its structure. When that success did not materialize on schedule, there was no mechanism to recalibrate without conceding strategic defeat. Each attempt to recover momentum deepened commitment and narrowed alternatives. By 1944, the Eastern Front consumed the majority of German military resources. Casualties mounted beyond replacement capacity. Fuel shortages immobilized formations. Allied bombing further eroded industrial output. The Red Army advanced relentlessly westward. The war ended in Berlin in May 1945, but its outcome had been structurally determined years earlier. The invasion of the Soviet Union had been launched at what appeared to be the last viable moment. In reality, it was already too late. The conditions required for success no longer existed. What remained was a narrowing corridor in which every decision reduced the possibility of reversal. The catastrophe did not arrive suddenly. It accumulated.